He came back. That is what you prayed for through the worst of it. That is what you held on to in the nights when the future felt like a doorway with no floor on the other side. When every ordinary exchange between you carried the weight of a question too large to ask out loud. If he just comes back. If he chooses this. If he chooses us. That was the sentence you carried. That was the thing you bargained for with God in the dark. He came back. He is sleeping in this house. He is at your table answering the children, filling the space in the morning the way he used to fill it, doing the visible work of a man who has made his choice. He stayed. He is here. His heart is still with her. Put your hand over your heart right now, your palm flat against your chest, holding it there, because what you are feeling in that hand is not a trust problem. It is not the distorted thinking of a woman who has been through too much and can no longer trust what is right in front of her. It is an accurate perception of something real in the invisible dimension of your marriage, a condition that has a name in the spiritual tradition that Padre Pio spent his entire life mapping, that has a specific prayer, and that is precisely what this video was made to address. If what you just heard names something you have been living, write it in the comments. You don't have to tell the whole story. One word is enough, because there are thousands of women watching this right now in the exact same place as you, and knowing you're not alone is the first move God needs to see. Here is what no one prepared you for, what no one around you has adequate language for, because the world does not have adequate categories for this particular season. The world sees the story as finished. He came back, which means the crisis resolved in the direction you prayed for, which means you are now in the rebuilding chapter, which means things should be moving, however slowly and however imperfectly, toward okay. The people who love you see a woman who made the brave choice to stay and a man who made the brave choice to return. They say you are strong. They say they are proud of you. They say give it time. And they mean all of it with genuine love. And none of it touches what is actually happening inside your house. Because what is happening inside your house is not a rebuilding that is simply taking time. It is a specific incompleteness that does not get smaller week by week the way something should get smaller if it were only a matter of patience and effort and intention accumulating into progress. You know this. You have known it longer than you have been willing to say it out loud. The specific texture of his presence has something in it that was not there before. A film over the ordinary moments that used to carry warmth, a quality of management in his tenderness that makes it feel slightly constructed rather than simply arriving, an eye contact that lands and moves on before it settles the way it used to settle. He is not cold. He is not withholding in any visible sense. He is trying, and his trying is real, and you honor it. And underneath all of the trying, something in him is still located somewhere else. He is home. He is choosing you. And he is somewhere else at the same time. And the cruelest dimension of this particular season, the one that lives below the grief and the fear and the ordinary difficulty of what you are rebuilding, is what it does to your sense of yourself. Because a woman in this position does not only grieve the distance in her husband, she begins to doubt her own perception of reality. She begins to wonder whether what she is feeling is real or whether it is the distortion of a mind that has been through too much and cannot now simply receive what is being given. She wonders whether she is creating the problem she is detecting, whether her vigilance is manufacturing the distance she is measuring, whether the most loving thing she could do would be to simply decide to believe what she is being shown and stop looking for what might be underneath it. The answer to all of that is, you are not creating it. You are reading it accurately, and the accuracy of your perception is not a source of more fear. It is the beginning of the precise prayer that addresses it. A woman I will call Renata, whose story her spiritual director gave permission for her parish community to share, came to her spiritual director 8 weeks after her husband had moved back in. She sat down and said something that cost her something to say, because she was not a woman who admitted difficulty easily. "He is here and he is trying, and I feel more alone than I did when I didn't know where he was." Her spiritual director did not immediately reassure her. He asked her instead to describe the specific quality of the loneliness. And she did. She described the managed tenderness, the eye contact that moved too quickly, the way his warmth felt like something being offered rather than something that simply arrived from inside him. She described the precise nature of the distance, not the cold of something that had ended, not the heat of ongoing conflict, but the particular loneliness of being in the same room as a person who is, in some interior way she could not fully name, located somewhere else. Her spiritual director said, "You are not describing a marriage that is failing to heal. You are describing a man whose soul is still tied to something he has already left. And the prayer for that condition is not a prayer for healing. It is a prayer for release." Renata had never heard those words together in that sequence before. Prayer for release, not for restoration, not for healing. Release. And that distinction, that one specific word, changed the entire direction of what she prayed next. Because a prayer for restoration asks God to build something new in a space that is empty. A prayer for release asks God to remove something that is occupying a space that is not empty at all, that is full, that has always been full, that simply cannot be accessed from the inside while the bond remains intact. The space where your husband's love for you lives is not empty. It has never been empty. It is the most fiercely present thing in the invisible dimension of your marriage. The love that God placed between you when He designed the two of you to find each other. The love that was real in every moment you experienced it as real. The love that your marriage was built on across every year you built it. That love was not destroyed by what happened. It was covered. It was held captive by a bond that has not yet been broken. Padre Pio, a 20th century Franciscan mystic who bore the visible wounds of Christ on his body for over 50 years, a phenomenon documented not only by Catholic sources but by secular physicians and journalists who examined him throughout his life, heard more than 5 million confessions across his ministry at San Giovanni Rotondo. 5 million moments of direct encounter with the interior of the human soul at its most exposed and most honest. And in all of that, across all of those decades and all of those millions of confessions, he returned with extraordinary consistency to one observation about what happens in a marriage when a husband has formed a deep outside attachment and then physically returned. He did not see, in the confessions of these men, evidence of love that had ended. He saw men in a specific kind of captivity, and he used that word with the precision of someone who had observed it thousands of times from the inside. He called it the double captivity. A man in double captivity has done everything his conscious will can do. He has made the right choice, reoriented his life, and is trying with everything available to him at the surface. And at the level of his soul, below the level of his decision, below the reach of his intention, something is still attached. A spiritual bond formed through real intimacy and real vulnerability, through the particular openness that human beings give each other in the places where they are most unguarded. And that bond did not dissolve when the relationship ended. Because bonds formed at the level of the soul are not in the territory of decision. They do not end because the person decides they should end. They end in one way only, through prayer aimed precisely and persistently at the bond itself. This is not a secondary issue. This is the issue. Your husband cannot fully arrive while the bond is intact. Not because he does not want to, he wants to, and you can see his wanting in everything he is visibly doing. But something below his wanting is still drawing on his interior in the direction of a connection that no longer exists in his life but that still exists, fully and actively, in the invisible dimension of his soul. And until that cord is severed by God, your husband is trying to close a distance that nothing available to either of you from the outside can close. The double captivity does not look identical in every man, and Padre Pio was precise about this, because precision in diagnosis is what makes precision in prayer possible. And a prayer aimed at the wrong condition is a prayer that works harder than it needs to and reaches less than it is capable of. In some men, the captivity shows as a global interior flatness. A man in this version of the condition is not only distant from his wife, he is distant from everything that used to matter to him. The warmth that is missing from the moments between you is missing from his response to beauty, to humor, to the things that used to move him in other areas of his life. He looks, from the outside, like a man who cannot find his way back to his own interior at all. Something the bond occupied has left a kind of vacancy in the place where the feeling life used to live, and everything requiring that part of him falls into the vacancy. In other men, the captivity shows not as flatness but as a specific directional pull. There is energy in the man, but it flows away from the marriage. Not necessarily toward the other person in any active or conscious sense. He is not pursuing a return. But there is a direction to the drainage, and you can feel which way it runs even when you cannot name exactly what it is running toward. He is slightly less present in the moments that should have his full attention, slightly more alive in the moments that allow his interior to remain unaccountable. Alone in the car, absorbed in work, anywhere the interior is not being asked to show up for something that requires it to be here. In other men still, the captivity shows as a very precise management of distance. Not cold, not pulled, calibrated. He never allows the situation to deteriorate far enough to force a crisis, and he never allows enough genuine interior closeness for real contact to happen. The distance is maintained with a care that looks, from outside, like reasonable post-crisis emotional carefulness. But what you are actually observing, if you watch closely enough, is a person protecting something sealed inside himself by controlling how much access anyone has to it. Keeping a specific interior door managed by managing everything that approaches it. Sit with your husband in your mind for a moment. Which of those three is most accurate? The reason the diagnosis matters is this: each condition asks the prayer to reach toward a different location inside your husband. For the man in global flatness, the prayer primarily asks God for reconnection, for the restoration of his access to his own interior, to the love that is present but unreachable from inside the flatness. For the man in directional pull, the prayer primarily asks God for severance, for the specific cord directing his interior energy in the wrong direction to be cut, completely and cleanly. For the man in managed distance, the prayer primarily asks God for safety, for whatever grace is needed to make it possible for the sealed interior to open without the protection of the calibrated wall. All three versions of the prayer come from the same root. They are all asking God to dissolve what should not still be intact. But the orientation shifts depending on which captivity is actually present. And that shift in orientation is what Padre Pio meant when he said that prayer without diagnosis stays at the surface, while prayer that has located the specific condition can go all the way down to where the condition actually lives. Padre Pio sat across from a man in his confessional. This account is preserved in the records maintained by his Franciscan brothers at San Giovanni Rotondo, who had been back in his marriage for 4 months and was in genuine anguish. He had ended the relationship entirely. He had stopped all contact. He was committed to his wife. He was going to confession, trying to pray, being present at home. By every visible measure, he was doing everything right. And every morning, without his permission, without his choosing, he woke into a specific interior state that he could not name and could not prevent. Not a decision to go back. Not a conscious desire. something more like the residue of a feeling, the trace of a particular interior aliveness that had lived inside a specific connection, and that his interior kept returning to even though every door to that connection had been closed with everything he had. He told Padre Pio he was terrified this meant something about what he actually wanted, that the persistent return of this residue was the truth of him that he was hiding from his wife, from God, perhaps from himself. Padre Pio listened without moving. Then he asked one question: "Are you choosing your wife today, fully, freely, without reservation?" The man said yes. With everything available to his will, yes. Padre Pio said, "Then the memories are not a second choice. They are a chain. And chains are not broken by trying harder to walk. They are broken by someone stronger than the metal." He told the man to stop fighting the morning residue. Stop meeting it with shame, which only reinforced its interior energy and gave it more room to operate. Instead, every time the residue arrived, every time the memory came without invitation, he was to offer a single interior line to God: "Lord, whatever this is still attached to, release it, and return whatever it is carrying to where you designed it to go." Not a long prayer, not a formal prayer. One interior sentence repeated as many times as it arrived, until it no longer needed to be repeated. 3 months later, this man returned to Padre Pio. He said the mornings were different. The residue still came sometimes, but it no longer lived in him. It arrived and passed like weather, he said, like something that no longer had a home in his interior. Passed through rather than settling, the way things pass through a house that no longer has a room for them. And in the space where the residue used to settle, something else had begun to grow. Something toward his wife. Not manufactured. Not decided. Simply growing, the way something grows when what was competing for the soil has been removed and the soil is finally available to receive what was always meant to be planted in it. His wife had been praying. He told Padre Pio this in the second confession. She had been praying something specific, not for his return because he had already returned, for his full arrival. And the prayer had been working in a dimension that neither of them could see, in the invisible interior of a man who was genuinely trying and genuinely still held, until the holding had been released by the only one who has authority over the interior of a human soul. What Padre Pio revealed about this, about the specific movement that occurs in a man's interior in the months after a wife begins to pray with sustained, correctly aimed intercession for the breaking of this bond, is something this channel is committed to going into fully and precisely video by video. Because no single video is wide enough to hold all of what he saw and taught about this territory. And the next video in this series goes directly into the part of it that this one is only opening the door to. If you are not subscribed yet, subscribe right now and hit the bell for every notification. Because what comes next in this series is exactly where today's video is leading, the pattern of return that Padre Pio documented, the signs that most women misread during this season, the specific moments that look like regression but are actually the first evidence of arrival. You do not want to reach that video without the foundation we are building here. Now, before the prayers, and there are 2 of them, built for 2 specific intentions and 2 specific times of day, because what the morning requires and what the night requires are genuinely different. I need to give you the interior preparation that Padre Pio said made the difference between a prayer that reaches the bond and one that circles around it. He was precise about this across decades of directing women through exactly this situation. And what he said is not comfortable to receive, but it is the most important thing I can give you before the prayer begins. He said, "The woman who prays for the release of a bond in her husband must first release the part of herself that is still keeping an interior accounting of what the bond cost her. Let that land before anything else. Because there is something running underneath the forgiveness you may have already offered. Underneath the choice to stay, the choice to rebuild, the genuine desire to see this marriage restored. Below all of those sincere choices, at a level that does not announce itself in conscious thought, is a ledger. A quiet, persistent interior record of what was lost, what was taken, what was done, and what it cost and what it is still costing. Your sense of safety in what you had built. The story you held about your marriage. Things in how you see yourself, your desirability, your certainty about your own perception, your ability to trust what felt real between you. The wound is layered, and some of the layers go very deep. That ledger is not a character flaw. It is the honest record of a genuine wound. Padre Pio never dismissed it or minimized it or asked a woman to perform a piece she did not feel. What he said about it was this: a prayer for your husband's release, offered while the interior ledger is running, arrives at God carrying two messages simultaneously. The message of the words, "Release him, return his heart," and the message of the interior beneath the words, "And make sure what was done to me is acknowledged, and make sure what I am owed is returned." And a prayer that is simultaneously pure intercession and private petition for your own vindication is a prayer divided against itself. Not dishonestly, sincerely divided, but still divided. And a divided prayer cannot reach as far as a prayer offered with both hands free. The woman who has set down the ledger, not permanently, not because the accounting was wrong, but for the duration of this prayer, arrives at her intercession with nothing at stake for herself except her husband's freedom. She is not praying for her marriage to be validated. She is not praying for what she is owed to be returned. She is praying purely for the freedom of a man she loves from a captivity he is suffering inside of, suffering in some dimension, whether or not he has language for it. And that pure, voluntary, costly intercession is the most powerful spiritual force available to a man who is still held. More powerful than his willpower. More powerful than any decision he makes at the conscious level. Because she is reaching into the invisible dimension of his soul from outside of it, with nothing at stake for herself except his arriving, with both hands free to reach rather than one hand on the prayer and one hand on the record of what she has not yet received. Before each bond prayer you offer, do this, honestly and without performance. Acknowledge to yourself whatever you are still carrying as a record of what this cost you. Let it be present, it is real, and it is true. And then choose, as a deliberate act of the will and not as a feeling you produce, to set it down for the duration of what follows. I am placing this record in your hands. You know every entry. You know the full cost better than I know it. I am not dismissing it. I am entrusting it to you so that my hands are free to bring this prayer without the weight of the ledger in my grip. What I am owed I trust to you, and I come to you now for him. That interior act of release is the beginning of the prayer even before the first word of the prayer forms. It is the posture that opens the door through which everything else passes. And then there is something else you need to know before you pray. Something about what the early stages of the prayer's movement look like from the outside, so that you do not misread what you are seeing and stop praying at precisely the moment when the prayer is beginning to work. Padre Pio was consistent on this in his letters, and the consistency matters. When a soul tie begins to dissolve, it does not dissolve smoothly or quietly. The man in whom it is dissolving does not immediately become more peaceful. He frequently becomes temporarily more agitated, more internally turbulent. Something that was sealed under a layer of managed calm begins to loosen on its way out, and the loosening produces disruption before it produces clearing. From where you are standing, this can look like distance, like regression, like the situation getting harder rather than easier. He may be more withdrawn for a period, more irritable or more internally absent, or more emotionally unpredictable than he was before you began to pray with consistency and precision. He may bring up the situation in ways that feel like a reopening of the wound rather than a healing of it. That is not the bond strengthening. That is the bond loosening. And loosening, in the interior of a soul that has held something deeply embedded for a significant period of time, produces disruption before it produces clearing. The root does not come out of soil that has held it for a long time without disturbing the soil first. Padre Pio wrote to a woman in this exact situation. She had written to him describing her husband's increased agitation in the weeks after she had begun to pray specifically for the breaking of the bond, and he said, "When the storm in a man's interior intensifies after you have begun to pray, do not retreat. That is not the enemy winning. That is what loosening looks like from inside a captivity. The storm is the signal that something is moving, and movement in the direction you are praying for is always what you asked for, even when it looks nothing like what you imagined it would look like. Pray through the turbulence. Do not interpret it. Do not allow it to become the verdict about whether the prayer is working. Stay in it with the knowledge that what you are observing in the visible register is the surface disturbance of an invisible movement you asked God to initiate. And during this period, watch for one specific thing. Not behavior. Behavior is unreliable during turbulence and will mislead you. Watch for the quality of his eye contact. Padre Pio made this observation to multiple women he directed through this season, and it was consistent enough that his brothers preserved it. The first visible sign of a bond beginning to release is not a behavior. It is a shift in the gaze. Before a man whose soul tie is dissolving changes the way he acts, he changes the way he looks. A man still fully in captivity has a specific quality to his eye contact with his wife. The look lands and moves. It acknowledges rather than arrives. There is something behind the eyes that is located elsewhere, and you can feel the location in the quality of the contact. The way it doesn't stay the way it stays when a person is fully present. You have been feeling this. That is exactly what you have been feeling and what you have been unable to name. As the bond dissolves, gradually across weeks in increments too small to measure on any single day, what shifts first is the gaze. A moment will come when his eyes land on you and hold. When the look settles rather than passing through. When something in the receiving of that look feels different in a way you will register in your body before you register it in your mind. He is there, actually there, not managing the distance or located somewhere else, not giving you the social acknowledgement of a person being careful with you, actually simply here. That moment, invisible to everyone else in the room, indescribable to anyone who hasn't been paying the kind of attention you have been paying, is the first visible evidence of a completed invisible movement. The first sign that what your prayer has been reaching toward has been touched by the one you asked to touch it. Hold that image in your mind as a concrete target when you pray the bond prayer, not a vague hope for general restoration. The specific image of his eyes landing on yours and staying, of the film lifting, of something alive arriving in the contact, of a look that settles because the person behind it has finally landed in the room. That image is the prayer's destination. Hold it precisely. A woman I will call Teresa prayed the bond prayer for 11 weeks. Not with complete faith on any given day. Not without interruption or doubt or the particular exhaustion of sustained intercession, when nothing visible is confirming that anything invisible is happening. There were mornings when the grief was so close to the surface that she could barely hold the words of the prayer together before something interrupted them. There were weeks when she was entirely certain she was praying at a ceiling and nothing was passing through it. she kept praying. In whatever form it came, complete on the good mornings, barely a sentence on the hard ones. On the hardest mornings, all she could offer was, "God, I cannot do this today. Take it." And Padre Pio would say to you, that is a complete prayer. Cost her something real to say it. And a prayer that costs something real carries a weight that effortless, certain prayer frequently does not. In the 11th week, on a Thursday evening, her husband was sitting at the kitchen table helping their youngest child with a school project. Teresa came through the hallway into the kitchen. He looked up, and she knew it before she understood it, knew it in her body before her mind had formed the thought, the way a woman knows things that have no conscious route to knowing, because something in that look was not what it had been. It landed and held. It did not pass. It stayed, with something alive in it that she recognized as something she had not seen in a very long time. He said nothing. She said nothing. She went back to what she had been doing in the other room. She sat down. She was quiet for a long time. She knew, in the specific way that a woman who has been paying close attention to a precise absence for an extended period of time knows when it ends, not with external confirmation, not with anything she could have shown to anyone else as evidence, but with a certainty that did not require verification and that she did not need anyone else to supply. In the 3 weeks that followed, without announcement, without formal turning point conversation, without any single identifiable event, something began to move between them. Not in the large gestures, in the texture of the ordinary, a hand placed at the small of her back without occasion, a conversation that went longer than it needed to because neither of them chose to end it, a night when he reached for her in a way that was clearly chosen rather than habitual, that felt like wanting rather than maintenance. She told her spiritual director what it felt like when she could finally find the words for it. It didn't feel like something we built, felt like something that arrived, like it had been traveling for 11 weeks and it finally got here. That is the language of a woman whose prayer reached the bond and broke it. Not the language of effort and time accumulating into progress. The language of an invisible thing completing itself and becoming visible in the life that had been waiting for it. Their marriage, 5 years from that Thursday evening, is not the marriage it was before what happened. It is not a restoration of what existed before. It is something built on a foundation that did not exist in the marriage before, a foundation of honesty that was forced into existence by what they survived, of chosen love that is more legible as a choice because it was tested at the point where it could have failed, of the specific depth that only comes between two people who have looked directly at the worst possibility and refused to let it be the final word. It is not a story about a marriage that recovered. It is a story about a marriage that became something it could not have been without going through what it went through. And that story began on an evening in the 11th week when a man's eyes landed on his wife and held. If you know a woman who needs to hear this right now, who has her husband physically home and can feel, in that particular way that requires no external confirmation, that something essential has not yet arrived, send her this video. Right now. Because what Padre Pio understood about this condition does not stop being true just because she hasn't heard it yet. And the prayer she is about to receive could be the thing that changes the entire trajectory of what she is living. Don't wait to send it. The woman you are thinking of right now is the woman this was made for. Now the prayers. 2 of them. Differentiated by intention and by the time of day each one is designed for, because what the morning requires of you spiritually and what the night requires are genuinely different things. And praying the right prayer in the right moment is part of what makes the prayer land where it is meant to land. The first is the bond prayer. This is the prayer you offer in the morning, or in the early quiet of your day, before the interactions begin, before the ordinary demands of shared life take your attention. before the moments that will require your full presence in the visible life of your marriage. It is the daily act of directed intercession, the sustained, specific, surgically aimed reaching toward the bond, asking God, each morning, to continue the work of dissolution in the invisible dimension that your husband cannot do from inside his own captivity. Before the prayer begins, the interior release. Find somewhere you can sit without interruption. A minute or two of stillness first. And honestly, without performance, without pressure on yourself to feel what you don't yet feel. Acknowledge whatever you are carrying as a record of what this cost you. Let it be present. It is real and it is true and it does not need to be pretended away. And then make the deliberate act of the will, not a feeling, a choice, to set it down for the duration of this prayer. Something like this, in your own interior. I am placing this record in your hands. You know every entry. You know the full cost better than I can account for it. I am not dismissing what it contains. I am entrusting it to you, so that both my hands are free to bring this prayer without the weight of the ledger in my grip. What I am owed, I trust to you, and I come to you now for him. Then breathe. 3 full, slow breaths all the way in, all the way back, and pray, Lord of everything visible and everything hidden, I come before you today on behalf of the man you gave me, not to demand, not to instruct you in the shape of what I need, but to place before you the one thing I cannot reach from where I stand. My husband has made the right choice. He has returned. He is choosing this life and this marriage and this family with everything his conscious will can bring to the choosing. And something below his conscious will is still attached. A bond formed through real intimacy, through real vulnerability, through the specific openness that human beings give each other in the places where they are most unguarded. And that bond did not dissolve when the relationship ended. Because bonds formed at the level of the soul do not dissolve through decision. They dissolve through you. I am asking you specifically and precisely, without vague or general language, to dissolve this bond. To find it in the invisible interior of my husband, in the dimension of his soul that belongs entirely to you and over which no attachment formed by human hands holds authority when you choose to act, and to sever it. Completely, cleanly, to release whatever of my husband is still held in that connection, and to return it without remainder, without residue, to where it was always designed to belong, to this marriage, to this life, to the love that is already present in him underneath everything that is covering it, that has never stopped being present, that is waiting only for what is covering it to be removed. I am not praying against anyone. I am not asking you to diminish any soul or override any freedom. I am asking you to cut the cord that should not still be intact. To do in the invisible what I cannot do from the visible. To act in the territory of my husband's soul that has always been yours, that no other claim has ever truly owned, and to claim it back now fully for the purpose you placed him in this marriage to fulfill. Through the intercession of Padre Pio, who sat inside the interior captivity of men exactly like my husband more times than we can count, who understood this bond from the inside of those confessions, who prayed for this exact release and who watched it produce exactly this restoration, I ask for the full dissolving, the full severing, the full return of my husband's heart into the life that is here, waiting, already built, already chosen, already his. I surrender the outcome to you. I surrender the timeline to you. I release the ledger and I receive whatever you allow. Do what only you can do in the place I cannot reach. Amen. After the prayer, do not move immediately. Sit in the stillness for at least 2 full minutes. Longer if you can give it. If something shifted in you during the prayer, a quiet, a release, a grief that feels different from the fear you have been carrying, Stay with it rather than moving away from it. That is contact. Something real happened in a real, invisible dimension of your situation. Something was sent that has no visible form yet, but that is already in transit toward the place it was aimed. Let that settle before you return to the day. The second prayer is the night prayer. This is for the hours that are hardest. The hours after the house goes quiet and the ordinary management of the day is no longer available as the place to put your attention. The hours when everything you are carrying has no competition and the specific grief of this particular incompleteness has the room entirely to itself, sitting with you in the dark, getting louder when everything else gets quiet. This prayer does not attempt to resolve anything. It does not ask for answers or for certainty or for any visible evidence that the invisible work is proceeding. It asks for one thing: permission to rest, permission to lay down, for the hours of the night, the weight of something that is too large for one person in the dark to hold alone, and to trust that what is laid down is not therefore abandoned. That what cannot be held through the night by a woman who needs to sleep is being held by the one who never sleeps and who is already at work in your husband's interior in ways that your wakefulness cannot assist and your anxiety cannot accelerate. Padre Pio said this to the women he directed through long seasons of this kind of waiting. It is preserved in the community accounts from his years of ministry. God does his most significant interior work in the hours of the night, in the quiet of souls that are finally still enough to be reached. Your presence in the night is not what sustains the work. Your sleep is what allows it. The night is not the pause in what God is doing. The night is when God can get the furthest in because the person is not managing their interior, and the woman has laid her intercession down, and the territory is simply, finally available. Before you lie down tonight, leave a small light on somewhere visible from where you sleep. A night light in the corner, a lamp in the hallway turned low, the faintest trace of warmth visible through a doorway from where you are lying. Padre Pio taught that a light kept burning in the night hours of a home sends a signal into the spiritual atmosphere of that home. It says, something is still present here. Something is still tending. Something is still keeping watch over what lives in this house. He believed that signal carries further than we can track with any instrument available to us. Let your small light be that signal tonight. Lie down. Close your eyes. 3 slow, complete breaths all the way down, all the way back. And pray. Sacred Heart, you who know what it is to hold something in love while it is not yet fully home, to be completely present in a space that still contains a distance, to love without reservation and to wait for the arrival of what you love with a patience that is not passivity but the deepest possible power. Be present in this house tonight. Come into the space between me and my husband, into the invisible gap that I feel and that he may not yet have words for, into the distance that his presence has not yet fully crossed. Move in that space tonight, in the hours when neither of us is managing anything, when the defenses are down and the interior is most open, when the soul is most reachable in ways the waking hours and the careful management of the daylight make harder. Work in my husband tonight, in the dimension of his soul that belongs entirely to you, below the level of decision, below the level of memory and its management, in the deep interior where the bond still lives. Do the quiet work of the night in him. Loosen, little by little, whatever remains of the cord. Return, piece by piece, whatever of him has been located somewhere else, so that he wakes tomorrow a little freer than he was this morning, and so that I wake tomorrow a little more at rest than I was last night. Not because the situation is resolved, but because I have placed it, again deliberately with open hands, into the hands that hold it better than mine ever could. I am not asking you to rush. I am asking you to continue. I believe you are already at work in him in ways that neither of us can see or measure. I receive this night as evidence of that faithfulness, not as interruption of it. Through the intercession of Padre Pio, who prayed through his own long nights for marriages in exactly this particular kind of incomplete return, who never once believed that any love was beyond your reach, who directed women exactly like me to trust the night and to sleep, hold us both. Do what we cannot do without you, all the way through until morning. Amen. Then close your eyes. Let the fear be there. It is doing what fear does in a body that has been through what yours has been through, and it does not need to be fought tonight. Let the uncertainty be there. It is real and it does not need to be resolved tonight. You have placed one more time, with deliberate hands and open palms, the thing that is too large for one woman in the dark into the only hands that are large enough to hold it through the night. That is not a small thing. That is an act of faith that accomplishes something in the invisible world tonight that neither you nor your husband will be able to see yet, but that God is already responding to in the deep interior of a man who is coming all the way home. He is coming, not as a feeling you can manufacture, not as a certainty you can maintain, as a movement that is already happening in the deep water, below the surface, before the tide becomes visible at the shore. And while it is happening, it looks from the surface like nothing is moving, because the visible doesn't shift until the invisible has already shifted. But the invisible has shifted. Your prayer is in it, working in a dimension that neither of you can observe, aimed at a location that only God can reach, sustained by a woman who keeps showing up to the prayer even on the mornings when the prayer barely forms. That woman is the most powerful force in the invisible world of this marriage right now. The next video in this series goes directly into what full return actually looks like when it arrives, the specific signs, the pattern Padre Pio documented in the weeks after this exact prayer was prayed for this exact condition, and why some of those signs look like the opposite of what they are. You will want that map before you are in the middle of the terrain it describes. I will meet you there.